a bit of a grey old day in Sydney and our friends in the bushfire areas are in real strife. Never mind, despite that, we will still bring you a car review today, and today it's a quickie Nissan 370Z. The story started 50 years ago with the 240Z, and there have been fair ladies and all sorts of iterations of this fabulously sporty Nissan motor car. Nissan are down to just a couple of passenger cars now, the GTR and this 370Z. It's quite old. It was released in 2009 and wasn't a great change in the car that was before it, the 350Z. It still has that neat coupe styling that we've come to love from the Z cars. Despite that, this venerable sporty coupe still has the most beautiful lines, the same lines that it had with the earlier 350Z. There was so little change that a lot of people had trouble telling them apart. This 50th anniversary edition, it's based on the base model, not the Nismo, and it is just confined to a little bit of spit and polish. They've got some transfers down here by the front doors, and the roof swoops gracefully over to the back where you find the hatch. And there's a couple of really neat details. The taillights, for example, they really are quite beautiful, and you can see the individual LEDs inside. You can access the boot with this rubber button and lock it with this rubber button. Over here's the reverse camera, which believe me you really need, with a fog light in the lower valance and the twin exhausts. Inside the boot is fairly shallow and there's not a whole lot of space. There is a cargo net that you can pull out if you really want it, and you can remove that whole thing. It accesses straight into the cabin, and there's a small amount of space down behind the seats just for a handbag or something small. But inside, the cabin does look a little bit dated. Door handles are a neat affair with this dull chrome look, and you can lock them here with this smart locking button. The headlights also look pretty neat with this complex kind of projection affair and some daytime running lights. All in all, the front of the 370Z looks pretty awesome. There's a few things that you need to know about the interior. For example, all of the instruments go up and down with the steering wheel. And that's great. And there's also a lot of other things around the cabin that I quite like. I quite like the instruments at the top. They all look a little bit added on though, but most of these cars have the same fault. There's some nice red stitching and this rather old-fashioned looking infotainment system. It is still a touchscreen, so I can still go to whatever function I like, but this affair here, which is typically Nissan, is slightly clunky. It's a little bit removed now from what most car companies are doing. There are direct select buttons down below, plus direct select buttons for AM, FM, etc. There's no DAB in this car, nor is there any Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Gear knob gets some nice red treatment, and this is the all-important button that puts rev matching in gears, and that is delightful for changing down. It is absolutely brilliant. There's a small glove box with the sockets in them and a very small bottle holder and bin in the door. Upholstery is this nice kind of red dotted Alcantara, and the leather has this nice stitching. The Alcantara continues on the steering wheel, as does the red stitching. Buttons are pure Nissan and are very, very easy to work. There is cruise control, but it's not smart cruise control. One final word on the binnacle before I go. I think this orange business here that looks like something from an 80s or 90s digital alarm clock, I think is just a bit naff. The other thing that I don't like, all track focus cars are at it, is the speedo is relegated to a position to the right of the tacho. And that's something I really can't be doing with. The 3.7 litre 6-cylinder V6 engine has outputs of 245 kilowatts and NMs. There's 363 of them. The engine is absolutely delightful. It's old, but it's delightful, and it's a version of the 3.5 that came before it. It just got rather bored. Get it? Bored? The engine got... Remind me not to tell that one again, sober. Unfortunately, here in these little country lanes, The suspension is foam. There's no two ways about it. And you feel yourself going over every single bump. And it's not an unpleasant experience, but anything harder than a fairly slow speed and you find yourself banging and crashing everywhere. But cornering, as you can see, is delightful. Absolutely delightful. You do feel a bit of weight in the back end, and that's odd because the car itself weighs about 1,460 kilos. Not light by any means, but nor is it heavy. The steering itself feels, again, fairly firm, and sporty drivers like that firmness. It does feel good on a track, and I've driven this car on a track, but most people are going to use it every day just to go to and from the shops in style. This is in fact a gentleman's carriage, and gentlemen like to have a little bit of luxury and so forth around them. Let me just change down and I'll show you what I mean. You didn't even hear it, but it revved the engine to match the gearbox. So when you take your foot off the clutch, there's none of that lurching forward that you often get. Driving a manual is fast becoming a dying art, and that's a shame. Because this is a delightful gearbox, though you do find that there are many, many times when you don't go into the gear that you intended, because the gate's a little bit offset, and as you go to slip it from, say, 3rd to 4th or try to go from 6th to 5th, if you're not paying attention, you'll finish up in 3rd. Luckily, this engine can handle it. This thing has brakes the size of dinner plates, and they pull you up really, really quickly. On a track though, I did find that they faded just a smidgen. At the moment we're getting about 11.9 litres per 100 kilometres, which is not exactly brilliant. Cabin noise on smoother concrete is fine, but once you get onto this rough stuff, this concrete road really does put quite a lot of sound into the cabin. The seats are fairly comfortable, as I said, they're Alcantara, and they hug you. The electric adjustment is down here near the console, which is a little bit hard to get to. You've kind of got to move your legs to get to it. And it's only the forward and backward of the seat and the forward and backward of the seat back that's electric. There's no squab or bolster adjustment. Again, that's something that you get in cheaper cars. So it might all sound a little bit grim, and it might sound like I've been having a bit of a whinge and a bitch and a moan and a complain. But in fact, I love this car for two reasons. I love it because it's a Z car, and I love it because it has history, and I love it because it has presence and style and class. There's a few things that I really like. I love that you can twist these little door vents to get them just exactly where you want them. They turn in their own circle. If there are two things that I could change, it would be the god-awful dash, which frankly just does not cut the mustard in 2019, almost 2020. They could easily whack an LCD dash in there and be done with it. The other thing you've got to consider too is there's no blind spot monitoring, no active cruise control, no active lane control. In fact, there's no lane warning, period. Sorry, that's my nav man. So you'd be well within your rights to say, well, you don't get much for your money. Again, that's a question only a buyer can answer. That's it. That's all for the Nissan 370Z. As always, don't forget, hit there to subscribe.